The late afternoon sun bathed the city streets in a golden glow as people bustled about, heading home from work or meeting friends for dinner. The air buzzed with the sounds of car horns, hurried footsteps, and casual conversations. Among the chaos, a single, soulful melody floated through the air, rising above the noise. Jamal, a 15-year-old boy with deep brown eyes and short curly hair, sat on an old milk crate at the corner of a lively downtown street. His fingers danced over the strings of a battered acoustic guitar. The wood scratched and faded from years of use. Despite its worn condition, the instrument still sang beautifully in his hands. Jamal played the blues, pouring raw emotion into every note. His music wasn't just sound. It was a story, one of struggle, dreams, and perseverance. With each chord, his passion shone through, making even the most hurried pedestrians pause for a moment. His voice, rich and deep beyond his years, carried with it the weight of someone who had seen life's hardships but refused to be broken by them. Jamal's dream had always been to become a musician. Music was his escape from the harsh realities of life. His mother, Angela, worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, while his younger sister, Mia, needed school supplies and clothes that they often couldn't afford. Their father had left years ago, and since then, Jamal had taken it upon himself to help however he could. Playing guitar on the street wasn't just about earning a few dollars. It was about hope. He envisioned himself on a real stage one day, under bright lights, with people coming just to hear him play. But for now, the sidewalk was his stage, and the strangers passing by were his audience. The more he played, the more people gathered. A middle-aged woman in a business suit stopped in her tracks, her frown softening as she listened. A young couple, hands intertwined, swayed gently to the rhythm of his song. Even an elderly man on a nearby bench tapped his foot in time with the beat. A few people began dropping coins and bills into his open guitar case. Jamal smiled in gratitude, nodding at each person who contributed. $5, $10, every bit counted, and every bit meant his family would eat a little better that night. From across the street, a group of bikers leaned against their motorcycles, watching Jamal with amusement. They were a rough-looking crew, tattoos covering their arms, leather vests adorned with patches, and cigarettes hanging from their lips. Their leader, Bruno, was the biggest of them all, with a thick beard and a mean scowl. He took a long drag from his cigarette, exhaling the smoke lazily before nudging one of his friends. "Look at this kid," Bruno sneered. "Thinks he's a damn superstar." The others chuckled, shaking their heads. "What's he even doing here?" another biker muttered. "This ain't some concert hall. It's a city street." Bruno smirked, crushing his cigarette under his boot. "Maybe we should teach him a lesson. Bet he thinks he's special." The bikers laughed, their voices filled with cruel amusement. But Jamal, lost in his music, didn't notice them watching. He just kept playing, unaware that trouble was brewing. Jamal's next song was one of his favorites. "A Change Is Gonna Come" by Sam Cooke. His voice carried through the street, rich with emotion. People stopped in their tracks, mesmerized by the depth of his performance. A woman pulled out her phone and started recording. Soon, others followed, capturing the moment. The music swelled, and Jamal closed his eyes, letting the melody guide him. This was where he belonged. This was his gift to the world. But just as the song reached its most powerful moment, a shadow loomed over him. He looked up and saw Bruno standing right in front of him. The music stopped. The crowd went silent. Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. The moment Bruno stepped forward, the atmosphere shifted. The once lively crowd, swaying to the rhythm of Jamal's song, fell silent. It was as if the air had thickened, charged with an unsettling energy. Jamal tightened his grip on his guitar, his fingers hovering protectively over the worn wood. He had encountered rude people before, those who sneered at him, who tossed a few pennies into his case just to mock him. But this was different. This was a direct challenge. Bruno, towering over Jamal with his broad, muscular frame, let out a low chuckle. His dark sunglasses reflected the streetlights as he took another step forward, hands resting on his belt buckle. "Well, Well, look at this little superstar, Bruno drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. Think you're some kind of legend, kid? Jamal kept his posture straight, refusing to shrink under the biker's gaze. I'm just playing music, sir, he said, his voice steady but cautious. Bruno let out a loud laugh, nudging one of his biker friends who stood behind him. Did you hear that? He called me sir. His gang joined in, their laughter coarse and mean-spirited. The people in the crowd exchanged nervous glances. A few bystanders had already pulled out their phones, recording the encounter. Jamal swallowed hard but didn't back down. He had worked too hard, poured too much into his music, to let someone like Bruno intimidate him. Bruno crouched slightly, placing both hands on his knees as if speaking to a child. Listen here, kid. You think standing on a street corner strumming that old thing makes you special? Makes you better than the rest of us? Jamal furrowed his brows. I never said that, he replied calmly. But before he could finish, Bruno snatched the guitar from his hands. The sudden movement drew a collective gasp from the crowd. Jamal instinctively reached forward to grab it back, but Bruno held it high above his head, dangling it just out of reach. Oh, you really love this thing, don't you? Bruno sneered, turning the guitar in his hands. Looks like a piece of junk to me. Jamal's heart pounded. That guitar wasn't just an instrument, it was his lifeline. It had been a gift from his late grandfather, the man who had first introduced him to music. He couldn't just stand by and watch it be destroyed. Please, give it back, Jamal said, keeping his voice firm but respectful. It means a lot to me. Bruno smirked. Oh, I'll give it back, all right. Then, without warning, crack. Bruno slammed the guitar against the pavement. The wooden body shattered on impact, splintering into jagged shards. Strings snapped, recoiling like coiled snakes. The sound of destruction echoed down the street, drowning out the horrified gasps of onlookers. Jamal froze, his breath caught in his throat. His world had just collapsed in an instant. The guitar lay in ruins at Bruno's feet. For a moment, nobody spoke. The street, once filled with the melodies of Jamal's music, had fallen into a stunned silence. A woman covered her mouth with her hands. A young boy in the crowd clutched his mother's arm, eyes wide with fear. Several people instinctively stepped backward, as if afraid Bruno's violent outburst might turn on them next. Jamal's hands trembled at his sides. He wanted to scream, to shout, to demand why this man would do such a thing. But no words came. Bruno, oblivious to the devastation he had just caused, laughed. Oops, he said mockingly. Guess it wasn't built to last, huh? His biker gang erupted into laughter, slapping each other's shoulders as if this were some kind of game. Jamal felt a lump in his throat, his eyes stinging. That guitar had been his only connection to his grandfather, his only tool to bring in money for his family, his only way to express himself. And now it was gone. Just when it seemed like Bruno had won, a deep, commanding voice cut through the tense air. That wasn't very smart. The laughter stopped. Bruno's smirk faltered. He turned around, brows furrowing, to see where the voice had come from. And that's when he saw him. Standing just a few feet away, arms crossed over his massive chest, was John Cena. His towering frame and unmistakable presence sent a ripple through the crowd. People began whispering, their phones now pointing at the scene unfolding before them. Cena's blue eyes locked onto Bruno with an intensity that made even the toughest men hesitate. Jamal, still paralyzed in shock, barely registered what was happening. But one thing was clear, the situation had just changed. Just when it seemed like Bruno had won, a deep, commanding voice cut through the tense air. That wasn't very smart. The laughter stopped. Bruno's smirk faltered. He turned around, brows furrowing, to see where the voice had come from. And that's when he saw him. Standing just a few feet away, arms crossed over his massive chest, was John Cena. His towering frame and unmistakable presence sent a ripple through the crowd. People began whispering, their phones now pointing at the scene unfolding before them. Cena's blue eyes locked onto Bruno with an intensity that made even the toughest men hesitate. Jamal, still paralyzed in shock, barely registered what was happening. But one thing was clear, the situation had just changed. Cena gestured toward the shattered guitar pieces on the ground. Bruno scoffed, trying to regain his bravado. "Look, man, I don't know who you think you are." But before he could finish, Cena took another step forward, and Bruno flinched. The tension in the air spiked. The bikers' gang, who had been laughing and jeering just moments before, took cautious steps back. They exchanged glances, unsure whether they should intervene or leave Bruno to face Cena alone. Bruno forced a chuckle, though it sounded weak. "Come on, man. It's just a stupid guitar. What's the big deal?" Cena's eyes didn't waver. "The big deal is that you destroyed something that wasn't yours. Something that meant the world to this kid." Jamal's breath hitched at those words. Someone was standing up for him. Not just anyone, John Cena. The crowd, now completely invested in the confrontation, began whispering in agreement. A few even called out to Bruno. "Yeah, man, just apologize. That was messed up, dude. Fix it before you regret it." Bruno's nostrils flared. He wasn't used to being put in his place, let alone in front of a massive audience. His fists clenched at his sides, but he knew he couldn't win this fight. So, with gritted teeth, he slowly knelt down and began picking up the broken pieces. As Bruno reluctantly gathered the shattered guitar, Cena remained standing over him, arms crossed, watching like a silent judge. The biker swallowed his pride. He hated this, being humiliated like this in front of everyone. But he knew there was no way out. He stood up and turned to Jamal, forcing the words out of his mouth. "Sorry." Jamal stared at him, barely believing what he was hearing. Bruno's eyes were dark with resentment, but Cena wasn't satisfied. "Mean it." Bruno inhaled sharply through his nose. He wanted to fight back, but the entire crowd was watching. His gang had already stepped away, not wanting to share his embarrassment. So, with one last deep breath, Bruno muttered, "I'm sorry, kid. I shouldn't have done that." Cena finally nodded. "Now leave." Bruno, humiliated and defeated, turned and walked away, shoving through the crowd. His gang hesitated, but one glance from Cena sent them scrambling after him. The moment they disappeared, the street erupted in cheers. Jamal, still processing everything, looked up at Cena in awe. I don't know what to say." Cena gave him a reassuring nod. "You don't have to say anything, kid. That wasn't about me. That was about you." Jamal's eyes welled up, overwhelmed by emotions. His hands clenched the broken neck of his guitar, feeling the weight of loss despite everything. Cena noticed and placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Come on," he said. "We're gonna make this right." Jamal blinked. "What do you mean?" Cena grinned. "You'll see." Jamal stood frozen, still gripping the shattered remains of his guitar, his fingers tightening around the broken wood as if holding onto a piece of himself. He could still hear the crunching sound of Bruno's boot against the delicate strings, the laughter that had followed, the cruel, mocking sound of someone crushing not just an instrument, but a dream. And yet, here he was, standing next to John Cena, a legend who had not only put Bruno in his place but also stood up for him when no one else did. The crowd was still buzzing, murmurs of shock and admiration weaving through the air like an electric current. Some had their phones out, recording everything. This moment would surely go viral. The kid getting bullied, only to have John Cena step in and turn the tables? People would be talking about this for a long time. Cena turned to Jamal and placed a firm but gentle hand on his shoulder. "You okay, kid?" Jamal swallowed hard and nodded, though the lump in his throat made it difficult to speak. I guess." Cena looked down at the broken guitar, a deep frown creasing his forehead. Then, without hesitation, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. The crowd went silent. Cena flipped it open, pulled out a thick stack of crisp $100 bills, and without a second thought, placed them in Jamal's trembling hands. Jamal's eyes widened. What? Cena smiled. "That should be enough for a new guitar. And then some." The silence broke into a wave of gasps and applause. Jamal stared at the money in disbelief. I can't take this," he stammered. "This is too much." Cena chuckled. "Trust me, kid. I think you've earned it. Besides, I want to hear you play again. And for that, you need a guitar." Jamal's eyes burned with tears, but before he could say anything else, another voice chimed in. "I got you, man," said a gruff voice from the back of the crowd. Everyone turned to see an older street musician stepping forward. He had a scruffy beard, a harmonica hanging around his neck, and a weathered acoustic guitar slung over his shoulder. "I've been playing these streets for years," the man continued. "I know how it feels to lose something that means the world to you." He reached behind his back, unhooked his spare guitar, and held it out to Jamal. "Take this, kid. No charge." Jamal's lip quivered. He hesitated, looking between the old man, the guitar, and Cena. It was too much. First Cena, now this stranger? People cared? Slowly, almost reverently, he reached out and took the guitar. The moment his fingers brushed the strings, a warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't his guitar, but it was a start. The crowd erupted into cheers, some clapping, others chanting Cena's name. But Cena wasn't done yet. He turned back to Bruno, who was still lingering nearby, his face red with humiliation, his hands clenched into fists. His gang stood a few feet away, clearly too embarrassed to be seen with him now. Cena stepped forward, and Bruno instinctively flinched. "You," Cena said firmly, his voice low but commanding. "Owe this kid a real apology." Bruno hesitated. The crowd fell silent again, everyone watching. A long moment passed before Bruno finally exhaled sharply and looked Jamal in the eye. "I'm sorry," he said. This time it sounded genuine. Jamal, still overwhelmed, just nodded. He wasn't sure if he could forgive Bruno, but hearing the apology meant something. Cena gave Bruno a final, piercing stare. "And don't let me catch you pulling something like this again." Bruno nodded stiffly, then turned and walked away, his gang scrambling to follow. The mood shifted as Jamal took a deep breath. He looked down at the guitar in his hands, then up at the crowd. They were still watching him expectantly. He strummed a chord, then another. A melody began to form, soft at first but growing stronger. The street, once filled with tension, now pulsed with music. The crowd swayed, some clapping along, others pulling out their phones again, this time to record something beautiful. Cena watched, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. This was what he had wanted. Not just for Bruno to back down, but for Jamal to rise up. Jamal's music filled the air, and for the first time that night, he felt whole again. Cena turned to leave, but just before stepping away, he paused and looked back. Jamal met his gaze. Cena gave him a nod of approval. Jamal nodded back, and just like that, John Cena disappeared into the night, his job done. But his impact, it would never be forgotten. Did you love this inspiring story? Smash that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories that will shock you, move you, and inspire you.